Good afternoon, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank. And today, we're admiring the first half in Chapter 34, Franklin D. Roosevelt and the Shadow of War, in Bailey, Kennedy, and Cohen's The American Pageant textbook.
And today, we have a special guest with us. Madam, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Flapper Girl from Chapter 31.
Flapper Girl, will you take us away?
Roosevelt wanted to focus on fighting the Depression, but as World War II approached, he realized that the U.S. could no longer stay isolated from European affairs. In the London Economic Conference, Roosevelt was unwilling to make agreements that could possibly slow America's recovery from the Great Depression. For example, many nations wanted to agree to maintain the value of the dollar. However, Roosevelt refused, since he wanted to pursue inflationary policies to relieve the Depression. In the end, no significant agreements were made in the London Economic Conference, and the trend toward extreme nationalism was strengthened. Frank, what international policies did the U.S. pursue?
Well, Congress passed the Tydings-McDuff Act in 1934, which stated that after a 12-year period of economic tutelage, the Philippines would get their independence, aka in 1946. FDR also made a notable change in foreign policy in when he acknowledged the Soviet Union as an official country in 1933. But Abe, how did FDR treat America's southern neighbors?
Well, the Great Depression started and it made America less economically aggressive, so Roosevelt pursued a good neighbor policy with Latin America. Under this policy, Roosevelt, 1, allied with Latin America to help defend the Western Hemisphere, and 2, formally endorsed non-intervention and withdrew American Marines from Latin America. So, the good neighbor policy emphasized consultation and non-intervention. Alright, Flapper Girl, how did the U.S. seek to stimulate international trade?
Well, since lack of trade had been one of the key factors in causing the Depression, Secretary of State Hull realized it was crucial to revitalize it. He therefore encouraged Congress to pass the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act, in which the tariff was drastically lowered, thus making international trade easier. Roosevelt also received the power to decrease the import tax goods by as much as 50%, attracting even more trade. Secretary Hull then made agreements with 21 other countries using the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act, in which both countries mutually agreed to lower their tariffs and begin to trade more. Frank, what policy rose to rival liberalism?
Well, unfortunately at this time, Flapper Girl, totalitarianism, or a system in which the government holds total authority over its subjects, began to spread throughout Europe. Under Stalin in the U.S.S.R., Mussolini in Italy, and Hitler in Germany. In 1936, Hitler and Mussolini joined together in the Rome-Berlin Axis, and Japan began to become more hostile as it quit the League of Nations in 1935 and also joined Italy and Germany in the Tripartite Pact. America continued to isolate itself, and in 1934, Congress passed the Johnson Debt Default Act, preventing nations from borrowing further from the U.S. if they already owed money. Some Americans even demanded an amendment to the Constitution to disallow the declaration of war. But Abe, can you tell me more about how Congress sought to legislate neutrality?
Of course. As the decade of the 30s crept by, more and more blame for World War I was placed upon American bankers and arms manufacturers than ever before, in an attempt to keep America neutral in European affairs. This must have worked, for the result was the Neutrality Acts of 1935, 36, and 37, all of which stated that no American could sell or transport weapons or make loans to any belligerent nation in a war. This legislation had the crucial flaw of placing no difference between an aggressor and a victim. In the eyes of the Neutrality Acts, both were equally undeserving of help. So I don't think we've ever talked about Spain. So, Flapper Girl, could you tell me what was going on with Spain on the eve of World War II?
In the Spanish Civil War, fascist Francisco Franco sought to overthrow the loyalist Spanish government. Franco was aided by Hitler and Mussolini, so some Americans responded by going to Spain to fight against Franco in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. America applied an arms embargo on Spain and thus simply watched the Spanish Republican government get torn apart by Franco. In the midst of all this aggression, America refused to strengthen its military and even began to let its navy decline. So Frank, did FDR find a way to fight fascism?
Fortunately, Flapper Girl, he did. Roosevelt circumvented the Neutrality Acts by not officially naming conflicts as wars. This way, he was able to keep supplying the Chinese in their fight against the Japanese. Next, Roosevelt delivered his quarantine speech in Chicago, where he called for actions against global aggressors like Japan and Italy, such as economic embargoes. America's isolationism was stretched to new levels in 1937, when the Japanese bombed an American battleship. The issue only narrowly avoided turning into a reason for war when Japan paid America the necessary reparations. Meanwhile, back in Europe, Nazi Germany was stretching its tentacles to encircle ever more territory, which European leaders allowed them to grab through the policy of appeasement. They forgot that if you give a Nazi the Rhineland, it'll ask for the Sudetenland. And if you give a Nazi the Sudetenland, it'll ask for Czechoslovakia. And if you give a Nazi Czechoslovakia, it'll ask for all of Europe. But Abe, can you elaborate on this conflict that was happening in Europe?
Of course. With the formation of the Hitler-Stalin Pact, Hitler was further encouraged to make war since he didn't have to fear a stab in the back from the U.S.S.R. So Hitler began to bomb Poland on September 1st, 1939, and France and Britain declared war. Americans were still determined to stay out of war, but since they really wanted the democracies to win, Congress passed the Neutrality Act of 1939. Now, European democracies could purchase American war supplies on a cash and carry basis. The democracies would have to pay cash and then transport the munitions with their own ships. With this new arms trade, the 1937-1938 recession was relieved and unemployment rates decreased. Thank you for watching. Please like,
comment,
and subscribe. And we'll catch you guys next time.